The Brown Bag Seminar Series, as you know, has been a long tradition as part of the Delta Science Program. But we've had a special series that's devoted to monitoring programs, and this is because there's 2 reviews that the Delta Independent Science Board is currently doing, one of which is on the monitoring enterprise that occurs in the Delta, and the other is on the IEP, the Interagency Ecological Program, which you know is responsible for quite a bit of the monitoring. And we had a wonderful seminar and series, a panel discussion yesterday. What we'll do is our speaker, Karen Larsen, will present her seminar, and we'll follow that with questions. And if you want to ask a question, if you could please come up to the microphone that's there, and she will take questions from there. Following that, we'll have a break, and then we'll have our panel discussion. So should be a very, very informative and interesting afternoon. Now, Karen Larsen is the Deputy Director of the Division of Water Quality at the State Water Resources Control Board. Prior to that, she was Assistant Deputy Director for the Division of Drinking Water, and she's educated in California with her BS in Biological Sciences from the University of California, Davis. So really, thank you very much for coming, and we welcome Karen Larsen. Shook your hand.
Wash it. All right, good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction. Again, I'm Karen Larsen. I am the Deputy Director of the Division of Water Quality, but I am here in the capacity as the co-chair of the Water Quality Monitoring Council, along with Taryn Rabazzini. I'm not saying her name right, I don't think. From the Resources Agency, she's our other co-chair for the council. I also wanted to take this opportunity to introduce you all to the new director of the Water Quality Monitoring Council. We just hired on starting January 2nd, I believe. His name's Nick Martirano. He's here in the room. He's our new council director. And he'll be taking over and working with Chris Jones closely to keep the charge of the council moving forward and keep us energized and focused on all of the priorities with respect to monitoring in the state. So with that, I'll get going on my presentation. I'm going to just educate you all on what the Monitoring Council is and how it was formed and why. I think there's a lot of overlap and synergy with the review that you all are doing of the Delta Monitoring Enterprise that is very similar to why the council was formed in the first place. I'll talk about the monitoring program strategy that the council developed in 2010 and some of the ways that they're implementing that strategy through their work groups and their monitoring portals. I'll talk a little bit about the program audit that has really given us some direction moving forward, and what are we going to be doing as a council moving forward. And then I'll just touch on some of the main messages I'm here to deliver to help you guys think about how to coordinate with the council as you move forward with your review of the Delta Monitoring Enterprise. And some of my panel members know this, but I think I'll be relying on a number of them, Chris and Greg and Lori and Adam, as our subject matter experts on some of the details of all of the monitoring that's going on in the Delta. So, everyone needs data. There are state, federal, local agencies, non-governmental organizations, environmental organizations, citizen groups, the scientific community, the academic community, all out there monitoring for a number of different reasons and spending a whole lot of money doing it. And that data needs to be turned into information in order for it to be useful. So we collect information to assess the status and trends of our aquatic ecosystems and the water quality, to look at public health and welfare issues related to water quality. And we also want to be able to look at the effectiveness of the programs that we put in place in order to either protect or improve water quality. But each of these studies at each of these levels generates data for its single purpose, and often is collected in a way that is inconsistent among different studies in terms of monitoring objectives, the sampling protocols and analytical techniques, QA/QC methods, data management and documentation or lack thereof, and assessment strategies. And often you cannot, or it's very difficult to integrate the data from these multiple efforts. And often, although this is getting better, and I think with the advent of AB 1755 and some of these efforts to combine and make data accessible, but often there is no common place for data to be accessed. And the data do not necessarily help us answer the questions that are of interest to management decisions. So here's a good example. We've been using this example for a very long time, so I've got a couple of extra examples I've included in this presentation. But here's one from our integrated report, which is the Clean Water Act requirement to assess our waters every 2 years and determine which ones are not meeting water quality standards. In other words, the 303D list. And this map is from our 2012 303D list, and it shows all of the impaired water bodies across the state. And if you're just a casual observer, you will think that the water bodies in the North Coast are the most impaired waters in the state just by looking at this map, which of course is not the case, and needs to be taken in context for sure. If you look at this same map and look at different data, the one on the left is our biological assessment data from the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, and it basically says good, bad, and ugly are the green, yellow, and red dots. And you'll see that the North Coast actually has some good water bodies, and probably among the greatest concentrations of good water bodies, or at least perennial streams for this assessment in the state. And then if you look at the map on the right, that's our data across the state for toxicity monitoring that's been collected by the SWAMP program. I believe this was circa 2011 was the assessment that was done, although this map may have been updated since then. Anyway, what you'll see there is that we don't know whether water bodies are toxic in the North Coast because there isn't data being collected there. So this just demonstrates that depending on what data you're looking at and for what purpose, you could get very different answers to the questions that you're asking. So the response was that the legislature decided to adopt legislation, SB 1070, back about 12 years ago now, that required the formation of a water quality monitoring council for the state. And its initial requirement was a memorandum of understanding between the Cal EPA agency and the Natural Resources Agency to work together to coordinate monitoring across the state. And it required that the council have some initial recommendations, which they developed in December of 2008, to maximize the efficiency and effectiveness of existing monitoring, water quality data collection and dissemination, and ensure that it's available to decision makers and the public. It also required development of a comprehensive monitoring strategy, which was developed and issued in 2010. This is just a list of all of the state entities, quite a wide range of state entities that were named in the legislation initially. And this is the list of the current Water Quality Monitoring Council members, and it includes state agencies as well as the regulated community, the scientific community, non-governmental organizations, and citizen monitoring groups. Anyone that has an interest in or expertise in water quality monitoring sits on the council. Well, not everybody, but a good wide range of folks. So what was the Monitoring Council's initial solution? It was to first not get mired in the technical details, that the folks that were doing the monitoring were the technical experts, and they should be the ones getting mired in the technical details. And so what the council recommended was to first focus on streamlined data access and answer users' questions through a single point of entry. They did this through formation of theme-specific work groups, like Is It Safe to Swim in Our Waters? And those work groups then developed portals that made the data to answer the questions available and the assessments available through the web. And the Monitoring Council provided overarching guidance, some consistency across the work groups, as well as expertise and conflict resolution as necessary. And I guess I've already sort of talked about this slide. The working groups are comprised of experts that are experts in a particular field. So the Safe to Swim are a number of folks from county health departments as well as state agencies that are working on monitoring for bacteria in oceans and inland waters is one example. And they develop theme-specific portals based on questions that are ones that users are interested in. So again, is it safe to swim in my water body? Those working groups are charged with standardizing the methods and the assessments as needed, only to the degree that it's needed to answer the questions, and identify needed coordination among entities that are doing monitoring around that theme. And again, the Monitoring Council provides guidance, consistency among the work groups, and any conflict resolution. So this table provides a snapshot of essentially the 9 working groups that have formed. They formed at different times over the years and have had varying levels of activity. All you have to do is go take a look at some of the portals and determine how active they are or not at this point. Many of these are driven by the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program. The bioaccumulation, Is It Safe to Eat Fish, is run by SWAMP, as well as the Healthy Watersheds Working Group. We've got the Estuaries Working Group, which is what I'll focus my discussion of the portals on today. And some newer ones, the Cyanohab Harmful Algal Bloom Network is one that is a newer group that is working on a specific issue. And then we recently, just in December, formed a environmental flows working group with our Division of Water Rights and some of the technical experts at UC Davis, DWR, and Squirt that are working on environmental flows, data collection, and modeling. So the role of the council is to establish policies and guidelines. They are a clearinghouse for the standards and the guidelines and the collaboration among the working groups. They resolve key issues, provide technical and, in some instances, monetary support, and they're charged with improving the visibility of the council. They also were the entity that developed the comprehensive monitoring program strategy for California that was issued in December of 2010 and is available at that link that's in my presentation. And the solution that they came up with came in 5 parts, starting with a decentralized organizational structure. So of course the theme issue-specific working groups with technical experts in those working groups, all working towards common monitoring council policies and guidelines. So one example of that is the question-based portals, is something the council came up with, set forth for the working groups, and that was some of the guiding one of the guiding principles that they used to develop their portal. They set performance measures as part of the strategy, and I'll talk a little bit about those performance measures in a minute when I talk about the Triennial Audit. The third part of the solution is a single point of entry to get the data and the information, to lead a set of theme-based internet portals, and standardize again as necessary to bring the data together to make assessments, but not standardize just for the sake of standardizing. And then setting some data management standards for more efficient data access and integration. This is the My Water Quality homepage that provides links to all of the My Water Quality portals. You'll see that each of them has a question as their point of entry. So is our water safe to drink? Is it safe to swim in our waters? Is the fish safe to eat? Are our aquatic ecosystems healthy? And in that one, there's the Estuaries portal, the Healthy Streams portal, as well as the Ocean Health portal. And are harmful algal blooms affecting our waters? And is there monitoring data near me? So these are all points of entry to look at the assessments and in many cases actually download the data and use it for your own purposes. So I'm going to focus in just to give you an example of the working group work and the portals on the Estuaries portal, since we are here talking with the Delta Independent Science Board. So it makes sense for us to talk a little bit more about the Delta. So I don't recall the year. Maybe Chris can remind me when the Estuaries working group was formed. Actually, Val is probably a better one to ask. 2011, so 6 years ago, the Estuary Work Group was developed with, as you might imagine, leadership from the state and federal contractors water agency and Val Connor's leadership, and as well as Stephanie Fong's leadership also with SWFCA. And their initial focus was on the Bay Delta estuary with an eye toward having portals and data available for other estuaries in the state. But of course, as we all know, there's a lot going on in the Delta, and it made a whole lot of sense to focus there as a starting point. And the portal is meant to be both educational, so what's being collected, where is it being collected, why, what are the relationships between the different data that are being collected, and also to provide a snapshot of estuary health. So conditions of major biological resources, the drivers of the patterns of the resources of those, and then detailed data that can be manipulated and downloaded and assessed. So I already talked about the initial leadership and funding coming from the state and federal contractors water agency. It was coordinated through the interagency ecological program that obviously had been doing a lot of monitoring, assessment, and reporting over the years. The data visualization was done through 34 North, and I have some screenshots of some new estuary portal developments that I'll show you here in a minute that 34 North has been working on, along with the Estuary Work Group. And then also using EcoAtlas for Delta Habitat Restoration Project tracking with endorsement from the Delta Conservancy. So here are some screenshots of the new portal. I don't think this is live yet. Yeah, so you guys get an initial look of what they're up to and some of the new information. So this is the initial page of the portal that provides links to a number of topic areas. As you'll see, you can explore California's estuaries. This has an eye toward having multiple estuaries included eventually, and of course, it's focused at this point on the Delta. You can explore data and look at what's available. There's a number of management tools through the use of dashboards and some assessments. And so I'll go into just a smattering of those to give you an idea of what's there. So this is where you go when you click on the Explore Data and Portals. So you get links to the different types of data that are available and the data sources. And then if you click on the data that's available, you get into the partner data, and you can see that there's water quality data, fish, zooplankton, benthic organisms, phytoplankton, water quality, and bird data available. When you click on benthic organisms, you get some information about what is a benthic organism and why do we care about them, and some additional information about species that are monitored and whatnot. And then you can get more into the data. So where is the monitoring happening? Who is doing the monitoring? You can start to click on the actual sites and get some information about the species that are collected at those sites and the abundance of those. There's also links to reports that are available about those data that you can access straight from this website. And you can get some dashboard tools. So this is just showing different data at different sites over a time series as one example of a dashboard that might be of interest. And you can filter data here by date range. You can look at geography. You can look at the different species that are of interest to you or specific stations. And then you can also, this is moving on to some fisheries data. You can look at, this is in particular, hold on, providing some management tools to show the fish trawl data by station and species and catch indices to inform managers of migration patterns and timing. Then there's also dashboards that show temperature and flow that also provide additional information about timing of fish migration potential. Then since we're the Water Quality Monitoring Council, we of course have some water quality data in there. So this is a summary of the total maximum daily load for dissolved oxygen, or I should say the impairment of dissolved oxygen in the deep water ship channel. It gives some information about the TMDL and generally are conditions improving. It shows in this instance that yes, it is improving. So this is just a general summary, but you can dive down into the data to show that yes, indeed, the data also support the assertion that the impairment is getting better. So that's just a flyover of an example of one of the portals that has been developed under the auspices of the Monitoring Council. I did want to mention, too, that there are additional efforts that overarch all of the working groups, the first being the Data Management Work Group, and they're convened to help with data management standards and all of the infrastructure tools that are needed in order to develop the portals and the dashboards and access the data in ways that can be made available through the portals. And so we have a dedicated data management work group. And then there's the Water Quality Monitoring Collaboration Network, which is a forum by which different entities doing monitoring can come together on a regular basis, hear about what's going on in the state. It's a forum for information exchange and encouraging exchange of ideas in terms of the methods and tools for monitoring, assessment, and reporting. It's really focused in on more like citizen science folks, but There's quite a range of topics that are available through those webinars each month. So I wanted to go over a little bit about the opportunities and benefits of the council and the work group's work. Essentially, one of the big positives that we've achieved is that we deliver answers to the degree possible we can to the public and underscore the important work of the agencies that are collecting the information. We provide a framework to motivate and guide improvement. And so through the work groups, you start looking at the data, you start seeing all of the warts of it, and you start talking to people about what are they doing, and understanding where there are data gaps or where there's duplicative effort, and you can improve that through that collaboration. And I think we can all agree that the more collaboration among people collecting information allows us to do broader assessments through that information sharing. We've also seen where the working group and the portal development can help agencies automate their annual reporting. The Estuaries portal is a good example of that, where the Department of Water Resources converted one of the required reports that they had to report to the state board under the Decision 1641 into an electronic report that was made available through the portal in both the assessments as well as in electronic version. And so it went from being just this report that was submitted each year to something that was made available to the public and used for other types of assessments. It also allows decision makers, legislature, and the public to understand how their dollars are spent. So it goes beyond the bean counting and allows folks to see our conditions getting better or worse. We can look at status and trends and access the information to guide future priorities for funding. And collaboration, most of the time, hopefully, improves the efficiency of monitoring and assessment programs, and transparency builds credibility. And I think from the Water Board's perspective, that has been one of the more valuable outcomes from our commitment to supporting the Water Quality Monitoring Council, is that we've been able, both through the council's efforts as well as some of our own internal performance management efforts, to turn our image around to an entity that actually provides data to the public in a way that is valuable to them and answers questions. And we, show where there are problems and issues and are honest about that. And we've been able to actually gain funding through these efforts by making our information available. So it's quite a valuable tool. And I want to emphasize this point, that this isn't just about getting data out there. And I will be the first to admit that the portals are not fresh. They're not, they need to be updated. We need to get into well, and I won't even say this correctly, I'll really date myself by saying we need to get into the new age of open data and making data available. And, so the portals served the purpose that they served when they were developed, but they definitely need to be updated. But what the value of them has really been the ends to the means, which is to form lasting relationships, lasting collaboration and cooperation among entities doing monitoring. And so the real value has been in building those relationships and getting the working groups working together and talking to each other and sharing information. Let's see. So part of the legislation also required us, in addition to forming a strategy, to go back and look at, well, how are we doing? You've implemented this strategy for a few years. You need to go back and look at how is it going? And so the it required us to do an audit every 3 years to audit the effectiveness of the monitoring program strategy, and needed to include the extent to which the strategy had been implemented and the effectiveness of the council, and in consultation with Cal EPA and the Natural Resources Agency. So these are the performance measures that were developed to look at the implementation of the strategy. And I'm going to key in here, each of the working groups was asked to assess themselves against these performance measures. And I'm not going to go through every single working group, but I am going to mention what the Estuaries portal came up with, or the Estuaries work group came up with when they did their own self-assessment. So with respect to their implementation of the program strategy, objectives, and designs, they gave themselves a medium rating and noted that they need to expand to more estuaries statewide, which is, something that they acknowledged from the beginning, that they were going to work on the Delta to start out with. And as resources were available and interest from folks who are working in those other agencies was gained, that they would expand to statewide. In terms of indicators and methods, they gave themselves a low rating, that indicators for the Delta were established specifically for the Delta and specifically for certain questions to answer. In terms of data management, they gave themselves a medium, where some data are not web-enabled, and that the reporting and formats make the data integration a challenge. In terms of consistency of assessment endpoints, they gave themselves a low to medium, where there's some trends and status that's available, but lacked extensive analysis of the data against thresholds, for example. In terms of reporting, they gave themselves a medium, and I would say that they're actually moving toward more live data and web services than they had been when they did their own audit, and so they're already improving in that arena. And then the big one, I think all of the work groups have suffered from, is maintaining program sustainability. And this is something that, again, relates to all of the working groups as well as the council itself. There's a general lack of dedicated resources for the council to do its work and for the working groups to do their work. And so that is obviously a problem to maintain the momentum and keep the portals fresh. And in particular, the Estuaries work group noted that they needed to establish a work group strategy and a business plan for moving forward. So that's what specifically the Estuaries work group came up with. I'll just give a quick overview of the audit of the entire council program. And what we did was we looked at our goals and asked ourselves, had we achieved them, and what are the challenges, and then where do we go from here, and what are those recommendations? So the first goal is collaboration, with the eye toward that monitoring is more efficient and effective through coordination. And we use that coordination to fill data gaps, minimize redundant monitoring, establish QA/QC procedures that are usable and feasible, and that data can be combined for broader assessments. So how'd we do? We formed 6 and now 9, and I think we're on 10, theme-specific interagency working groups. So we were successful at getting some working groups together. Some were more collaborative than others, and some were more active at this point than others. We formed the Water Quality Monitoring Collaboration Network, the Data Management Work Group, and we've developed some tools for consistent monitoring, assessment, reporting, and data management. The second goal was to make information accessible so that the resulting data and information are made available to decision makers and to the public. And monitoring is designed to address management questions and data is turned into meaningful information, and that information is made readily accessible. So how'd we do on that? We released 6 question-based My Water Quality portals, and those are still up and running today. The Wetland Monitoring Work Group has assisted through their efforts to provide information and a framework that has informed the State Water Board's development of our dredge and fill procedures policy. And we're actively actually working closely with the working group on some of the technical details we need in order to support that policy. And developed also the first statewide integrated multi-metric assessment of watershed health. And we have some really exciting maps that were developed in coordination with Fish and Wildlife and the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program on a statewide assessment of watershed health. That's through the Healthy Watershed, are we calling it Watersheds Portal or, yeah, okay. Lori Weber is your subject matter expert on that. Our third goal was that the projects that are funded by the state, we can track the effectiveness of those. And this is one piece of the charge that was given to the council that was not fully implemented and proved to be more difficult than expected and still needs to be addressed by the Monitoring Council. Basically, the idea was that we would work together to provide some guidance on how to do monitoring to show the effectiveness of all of the projects that are funded through the bond programs across the state. Each project is required to do its own monitoring. Does that make sense? Probably not. But we had not been successful at figuring out a way to comprehensively monitor for the effectiveness of all of the projects that are funded. So that's still a to-be-done item. So what are our challenges? I've already mentioned the lack of dedicated funding for the program. We need resources to sustain collaboration. Collaboration and coordination is not free. We've got people who, I would argue the working groups that are most successful are the ones that have participants who see the value in their own work in working together with other participants in a working group. So, for example, DWR's efforts to automate their D1641 report. That's a what's in it for me. I'll participate because I'm going to get something valuable out of it. So I think we need to identify more of those opportunities in order for the working groups and the council in general to be valuable across the agencies that we want to participate. We have generally inconsistent work group leadership, a lack of resources for the participation in those work groups and the development of the portals. We've sort of, I like Rich Brewer's analogy that we've made stone soup. Everybody kind of comes to the table with what they have, and we've been able to make some pretty valuable products, but that's not a sustainable way to keep things fresh and usable moving forward. Often, as a result, the work group tools have no agency home, and therefore no one agency that's responsible for keeping it going moving forward. And I think one of the big things that we have suffered from is a lack of really good communications and outreach strategy to kind of get the word out of what the council is trying to do and the value of participating in the council and the work groups. I think that's something that we scientists generally are poor at in general, and this is another example of being poor at that. So where do we go from here? We've done a lot of soul searching as a council over the last couple of years. It seems each of our our meetings have been, okay, so now what? We've got these portals out here. What are we going to do now? Are we still valuable? We think we're valuable. How can we be valuable? So we're focused now on looking at the mandates and the priorities of the agencies to, again, add value for those who are participating and to increase that participation and potentially funding that comes to the table as a result. So we're being a little bit more opportunistic, which is why we've started to focus on the harmful algal bloom issues. That's one that has really expanded in terms of the problems across the state, and one that we think that we can add value to and provide information and get people together to talk and share information to both make information available, but also figure out what's going on and how to fix it. Another is the Environmental Flows Working Group is another opportunistic, another opportunity that we're taking advantage of because there's a lot of effort going on in that arena. So we're working on developing recommendations to ensure that the data are effectively shared across the agencies. You might remember back in 2014, the Data Summit vision paper being developed. I think it was somewhat a pretty good basis for what ultimately became AB 1755 that the Department of Water Resources is taking the lead on. I think these are all opportunities for the council to collaborate and participate to add value to these efforts. I already talked about our focus on some key issues, the Delta being one, harmful algal blooms, and focus on the human right to water. And a new portal has been released that provides data on drinking water across the state through our Division of Drinking Water at the State Water Board and others involved with the human right to water work. We're also focusing on the Data Management Workgroup and their participation in AB 1755 efforts. And our next steps are really to take a hard look at the council membership, where we're going, and who needs to be involved. So that includes both the organizations that sit on the council and have some influence over the council's direction. We're proposing to expand that, and we have a subcommittee that'll be meeting in the next couple of weeks to start developing some recommendations for the broader council to consider. We're also simultaneously looking at updating the council's strategy to really look at who does the council serve, who are our audiences, and how can we best serve those audiences, and to continue to promote and support high priority initiatives, soliciting input from the secretaries for natural resources as well as Cal EPA, and again, update the portals or create a new iteration of the portals that serves the same purpose but is much more accessible and usable. So I wanted to end with just a few kind of thoughts that I think will then tee up the comments that the panel gets to make next. I think you'll all agree that we have common goals. We all want to collaborate. We all want to make sure that the data that is collected is usable to answer questions and make decisions, and that we can all work together to share information and make that data and information much more valuable than its component parts. One thing I do want to mention is that the council has all along supported and encouraged the development of and continuation of regional monitoring programs, such as what the Central Valley Board is leading through the Delta Regional Monitoring Program, Region 2, the San Francisco Bay Regional Monitoring Program, the BITE program in Southern California, all programs that are of value and we feel are really the way to continue to keep people together, working on collecting information so that it can be used and decisions could be made from it. I can't emphasize enough the need to look at the data and assess it and try to use it for something, because then you really see how crappy it is sometimes. And not be afraid of that, because I think that that's the only way we can improve. I have a lot of, I don't know how many of you have had a look at our performance report that comes out of the State Water Board. It was every year. It's had taken a little hiatus over the last couple of years. It's being released again in February. But people were afraid to get their information out there, but what it caused was people to actually look at their data and see that it needed to be cleaned up and fixed, and it improves the data when you take a look at it. So I can't emphasize the need for assessing the data and getting it out there for people to look at. And then, of course, coming from the State Water Board and the Water Quality Monitoring Council, I want to emphasize the need to continue to look at contaminants as a stressor in the Delta, and across the state, really, but one that can't be ignored and should be included in all of your guys' discussions of the monitoring enterprise moving forward. And now that I have made it through without a coughing fit, I'm really happy. I met my performance measure. I'll answer questions, and then I'll start coughing so I don't have to answer them. Save them for the technical experts, these guys that are going to talk. No
Yeah, I have a
questions?
question on your second or third last slide. You talked about to continue to monitor emerging issues and priority areas.
Mm-hmm.
What are the emerging issues, or is there a document that you have that's updated that talks about what the emerging issues might be?
The council hasn't come up with a specific document. It's been more as issues arise through the monitoring that's going on in the surface water ambient monitoring program, for example. Greg Kierhart can speak to some of this, is just as, like for the harmful algal blooms, for example, is one that has really risen to the top as a big issue that the council has decided to focus on and provide additional support for. So no, it's not documented. We're just being opportunistic as administration priorities change, as our agency secretaries' priorities change. We're trying to be fluid and not just focus in on we're doing this because we've always done it. We want to be flexible and support the need for information for particular issues that are high priority at the time.
So for right now, you'd say the harmful algal bloom is one of the key emerging issues?
That's one that we're working on for sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was really timely for us. This morning we were talking about our water quality science review, which we're a little bit schizophrenic. We keep saying we're not trying to focus on water quality monitoring in this review, but inevitably monitoring comes up. And one of our data inputs was how aware are you of the Water Quality Monitoring Council? And that's where we got, I was just looking at that, we got a fairly good split in terms of a number of people saying absolutely and a number of people saying huh. So, and one of our recommendations is the Water Quality Monitoring Council could be a very useful way to get more of this information out there and get it usable by people. And what you just said really reinforced that. And then we had a further discussion this morning. That's a recommendation we're making, but how would we implement that? Not us, but how would it be implemented? And so one of the things we're planning to do is have a discussion. I'm just giving you a heads up. We might be calling you or some of your folks. We make this recommendation, but what would it take to make it real? And I know you guys are grappling with that, but I think there's a co-evolution happening here, hopefully. So
Great.
Thank you so much.
That's encouraging. I appreciate that.
But you know, if we look at this questionnaire that Tracy was just referring to, the majority of the people said that more funding should be available. an equal number said they weren't aware or they weren't familiar with the Water Quality Council, which, having attended your meeting, I found that kind of amazing. How do you get the word out that this data is available? Have you concentrated on making it available and known to the public more than to the agencies? I found this just kind of really unbelievable, that the number of people that weren't familiar with the council.
I think we've just generally done a poor job of communicating it to everyone, really. I mean, if you know it's there, you know it's there, but we haven't, I would say we have not done a good job of getting the word out. And the council members in general, I think we need to do more to get the council members talking to their own constituencies about, I mean, I think some do it better than others, but yeah, I think generally we're not faring well on that communications front. Yeah.
Any other questions from the board?
Oh.
We always give ourselves precedence.
Thank you very much for that, a very useful presentation, and thank you all for coming. We had the IEP panel yesterday, and that was similarly illuminating. It keeps striking me that so many of the water problems and water environmental quality problems that California faces are beyond the capabilities of any single agency, technically or institutionally or authoritative in terms of their regulatory authorities, and that we really have to try very hard to get agencies to work together so that they have enough budget, enough expertise, enough authority to accomplish the technical things that need to be done to solve the problems. And it's really hard to get agencies to do that, even within agencies, to get different programs within an agency to do that, because it's always easier to ignore and fight and be territorial than to cooperate. And that's true for academic departments as well, so this is just a human condition problem. And both IEP and the Water Quality Monitoring Council are attempts to rise above that. Yeah. And of course, given the human condition problems, you'll never have better than checkered success. And so I really appreciate your efforts to try to do this, and some of your thoughts on the challenges you're having and the thoughts you have on where are promising ways to move forward. So thank you very much, and please continue.
Oh, you've just relieved me. I thought you were going to ask me how to fix it all.
Well, I mean, this is the human condition problem that we faced for thousands of years and will continue to face.
Yeah.
Any questions from the audience? Please come and stand at the microphone. Or comments, we'd appreciate. I've actually asked Chris this question too, and I'd be curious what you would say. What percent of IEP's data do you think is currently on the portals, or any of the others? Or would you have any guess about the data that's out there on the Delta? How much of it is on the?
I'm not the right person to guess that. I'd be totally swagging it.
I would say it's a very small percentage of IEP data is currently on the Estuary portal. Currently, we're really partnering with the Delta Juvenile Fish Monitoring Program and the IEP Environmental Monitoring Program. That's really what we've been focusing our efforts on. Of course, through the work with 34 North, they do have access that they're able to pull from other data sources like CDEC and other partner data. But I would say it's a relatively small percentage of the IEP data sets.
And then a follow-up question would be, when this legislation was enacted, was there ever discussion of making it not voluntary, but some type of carrot and stick approach in terms of people putting their data in through the council?
I'm not aware of any thought that it would be a requirement. Anyone else? No, I don't think so. Although Val might have some.
When the legislation was first passed, it was sort of viewed that this was the first piece of legislation and kind of let's see what we can do, especially in terms of bringing in data from, say, federal agencies and partners. And so it was envisioned that there would be this report back, and we would take that next step forward. That next step forward, and in terms of that report back to the legislature, I think still needs to occur. But the other thing is the focus was on water quality, and at the time, water quality monitoring was funded through the Water Board through a monitoring surcharge on permits. It was a 20% tax, if you want to call it that, to support monitoring. That's disappeared now. So things have gotten, I think, worse rather than better.
I can speak more to this later, but I think the companion legislation to your question is the 1070 bill, the Open and Transparent Water Data Act, and 1755, AB 1755. The problem with that, though, is it doesn't specify data sets to arrive. It talks about the council being a partnership in this platform that's being built that would open and share data, but it doesn't say exactly which data sets to make available. So I think there is progress on that evolutionary step of next step was naming open data as being important, but we still need to identify the key data sets.
This on? Okay. So I guess this is more of an ideological or hypothetical question. If you're talking about water quality, you're mostly talking about the physical, chemical properties of water in a certain time or a certain period of time. And then when we go, going back to remembering the presentation by Steve yesterday about the IEP monitoring, mostly talking about the biological aspect of it a lot of times. And then my perspective of biological monitoring or biomonitoring or bioassessment is looking at the communities at the time or the period of time, and then you can try to connect that with the water quality issues, say the flow aspect of it or the physical chemical properties of it. And then I guess the question to you or maybe comment is what's the plan for that kind of sort of a connecting from physical chemical properties through the water quality monitoring, and then also the biological assessment of it, and then sort of connecting those in the California or the Delta, or well, I guess that has been done in the nationwide in, say, like EPA perspective. So I guess it's planned. What's the next step for your water quality monitoring or the Water Quality Monitoring Council?
So I'll answer this from with my water board hat on, actually. I've been working on, and now my staff are working on developing what I'll just call biological objectives. We've got the SWAMP program has a statewide biological assessment program in perennial streams that has been going on since, oh gosh, a long time, and includes reference stream monitoring. And we have a pretty darn valuable, robust data set that we can now combine with the water quality data. And in fact, we've got 2 projects that we've combined now that are developing both what do we mean when a stream is good in terms of its biology, and our intent is to use multiple indicators, our most robust one being benthic invertebrates, but we've started to develop algal indicators as well. Of course, the holy grail is fish ultimately, which we haven't even touched on yet. And combine that with the development of nutrient endpoint, a policy for looking at nutrients as a first stepping point to use those data to identify thresholds for nutrients in perennial streams as well. So at the State Water Board, we're actively working on combining those 2 types of indicators in a way that helps us look at how to address water quality problems and what those thresholds ought to be. In the Delta, I'll rely on somebody who knows a lot more about Delta biomonitoring to speak to that question, but it's definitely something we're thinking about. Okay.
Any other questions? Now, I think what we'll do, oh, yes, please.
Hi, Laura Volpe with SWIFCA. So I think the prior question really kind of hit at a little more fundamental of a question, or at least as I interpreted it, is, you know, when the term water quality is a very nebulous term. To some people, it means like DO, pH, turbidity. To other people, it means toxicity. To other people, it means, you know, the chemical constituents, the contaminants in it. And, you know, and so I would just offer that. I don't know if, can you speak as the different portals, do they just include, you know, sort of the DO, turbidity, pH of water quality, or does it go beyond that into toxicity data and chemistry data and the whole ball of wax, or?
Yeah, I'd say that there are a wide range of indicators that are presented as part of the portals. You got safe to swim, which is mainly pathogen data. You've got, is it safe to eat fish? So that's fish tissue contaminants. So that's water quality, sort of. It's in the fish, though, right? I already mentioned we've got biological data, and that's made available through our Healthy Watersheds portal. And then we do have the normal toxicity is another one through our Healthy Watersheds portal. We've got regular nutrient data, DO, you know, as those indicators are valuable in answering questions, we present that data.
And then I'll just add that you mentioned earlier that the new flows subgroup is coming along.
Yeah.
And that's really the one that's tying together some of these pieces, the ecological flows and different endpoints. And there actually is a project that looks at using the Southern California benthic data to actually develop new endpoints. So.
And I'll just add to the question that I think that with the Monitoring Council, at least in the context of our efforts, that a lot of the water quality, what's considered water quality, really just depends on what partners are taking part in the work groups. If we have additional partners that are able to take part, you know, really the council's efforts relate to water quality or ecosystem health, and it's pretty broad in terms of what we cover. And often what we find is that the efforts of our work groups and what's on the portals really depends on who's partnering with us. So I think it's pretty broad.
Okay, what we'll do is we'll take about a 10-minute break now, but before we break, you know, I was thinking, in this, especially in this last discussion, about 40 years ago, John Cairns, who was one of the first people pushing biological monitoring of pollution, had a really interesting comment. He said, you know, what we need for monitoring is a freeze-dried talking fish on a stick. And I think that's kind of a good point to take a break. When we come back, we'll have an interesting panel discussion. So about a 10-minute break, and please come back ready with questions and comments, too.